So hello, everyone. My name is Shakayla Alvarenga, and I am the Director of Public Programs here at the Mob Museum. Thank you for joining us for tonight's discussion and for being here for this very important event called Life After Prison, Women Helping Women Return to Society. It's a pleasure to introduce our panelists for this evening's program. Right here on the left is Jody Hawking, the founder of Return Strong, a grassroots organization dedicated to dismantling the prison industrial complex by advocating for the empowerment of women, people of color, and individuals facing poverty within the criminal, legal, and correctional systems. Through her leadership, Hawking has mobilized families and empowered individuals who are incarcerated to amplify their voices, employing a commitment to equity to forge pathways to justice for Nevada's most marginalized and vulnerable populations. Next to her is Emily Salisbury. She serves as an associate professor of social work at the University of Utah. Her expertise centers correctional assessment, treatment, and gender-responsive policy, particularly focused on women. With a PhD in criminal justice from the University of Cincinnati, Salisbury collaborates with state, federal, and international correctional agencies to implement evidence-based and gender-responsive strategies. Next to her is Vera Moore. Her journey culminated in the launch of True Beginnings in 2019, following over 5 years of work in Virginia's reentry landscape. As the founder and CEO, Moore channels her firsthand experiences with the system to inform the organization's direct services and advocacy efforts. True Beginnings, steered by justice-involved women, spearheads systemic change aimed at reducing incarceration and recidivism rates, fostering accountability within the criminal justice system, and fostering healing within communities impacted by its harms. And lastly, Gabriela Najera is the Associate Warden of Programs at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, bringing over 2 decades of experience within the Nevada Department of Corrections to her leadership position. Having traversed various institutions, including Southern Desert Correctional Center and High Desert State Prison, Najera's work lies in facilitating the reentry of individuals into society. Najera lost her voice this morning, so she may not be able to talk as much throughout tonight's discussion, but we certainly appreciate her for still being here tonight. Our panelists certainly bring a wealth of knowledge and diverse perspectives to the table. Please give them a warm round of applause. While men still outnumber women within our nation's justice systems, the rate of growth among the female population has surged significantly. Now, according to data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, between 1980 and 2019, the number of women who are incarcerated across both jails and prisons soared by more than 700%. The rapid expansion of the female population within the justice system has prompted both state and local officials to reevaluate existing policies to better accommodate the needs of women involved in the justice system. Now, policymakers have begun broadening their perspectives and implementing gender-responsive solutions and innovative programs specifically tailored to address the unique challenges faced by women. The goal of tonight's discussion is to shed light on this issue and explore the various approaches that jurisdictions are taking to address the distinct needs of justice-involved women. So Emily Salisbury, we will start with you. Emily brings a comprehensive academic and scientific perspective to our discussion. So based on your research, what factors have you identified as contributing to the significant increase in the number of women in prison?
Thank you so much. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to the Mob Museum for inviting us to be here tonight. This is an incredibly important issue to, of course, all of us on stage and to many of you in the room. So thank you so much for highlighting the issue. There's a number of different reasons why we have decided to get tough and to enter into this sort of what academic criminologists oftentimes call the mean season in corrections, which has been going on for about 50 years. Once politicians in the 70s realized they could win political points by being tough on crime, you saw them talking about being tough on crime. And so, of course, now we're talking about trying to be smarter on crime as opposed to tough on crime. There's a science behind how we do this work, and it's important for us to understand that we can't have public safety without treatment and rehabilitation. And mass incarceration has not only affected hordes of men in this country, particularly men of color, but also disproportionately women and women of color. There are a number of different reasons for it, but it's not because women are committing any more crimes than they ever were before. Girls are not becoming more violent, women are not becoming more violent, girls are not joining gangs more than they ever were before. We have made policy decisions around incarcerating people who are hurting, people who are poor, people who suffer from addiction. And every time we widen our net to try to bring more and more people into the system to incarcerate individuals, whereby they've become the de facto mental health institutions in this country, every time we widen the net and sort of increase, sort of our war on drugs, massive neglect in public health and substance use education, trauma-informed services, or opioid, homelessness, thank you. We actually, when we widen that net, we disproportionately bring more women into the system because, quite frankly, they just are not nearly as dangerous, they're not nearly as violent as justice-involved men, to be quite frank. And so, they're oftentimes ignored and afterthought dismissed because they only make up about 7% of any prison population. But the reality is every single policy and procedure that, it was designed for men and then applied to women as if their pathways to criminal justice and crime and to incarceration are the same, affects every woman 100% of the time. So a lot of times the reasons that they're coming in are, again, homelessness, poverty, trauma. The amount of victimization and abuse that many of these women have experienced who are incarcerated, I don't think I could have survived. And the fact that more women aren't violent is actually quite astounding, given the amount of trauma and victimization that many of them have experienced. So many, many issues that I think we can get into this evening.
Thank you.
Can I say something in regards to that? It's interesting, Dr. Salisbury, that you say that more women aren't violent, when in all actuality, the reason that the women are going to prison, in my opinion, is because they are practicing violence. But it's not violence outward, it's violence within.
Yeah.
And so when they practice that violence within, it gets them caught up in drug usage, homelessness, domestic violence, things of that nature. And so the violence is just a large culmination of what's sending the women to prison. But it's just not practiced outward as much as the men. We internalize it, and that is where we get the trauma and why people should be practicing harm reduction.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Gabriella, during our previous conversation, you had mentioned that Nevada has actually seen a decrease in the number of women in prison, with the current count, I believe, at 700 compared to 1,200 7 years ago. What do you attribute this decline to on the other end?
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. One of the reasons why I believe that the population has decreased is not because they have not been convicted, but because I believe that things are getting a little bit better in the state of Nevada. I'm looking back 20 plus years when I started in the system, and I've seen a huge change. Not where I would like it to be, because it's in progress, but I've definitely seen some of that. I remember that back about 7 years ago, we were at 1,200, about 1,200 offenders in the facility. Right now, our count was 704 today, which is great. I know that COVID had a lot to do with it. Our numbers dropped to about 500 and something after COVID, which was good. They were not sending people to prison as much as they were before that. So that helped a little bit. Now I see it has remained about the same in the last year or so. I'm hoping that stays like that even goes a little bit lower than that. We don't want people incarcerated. We want people to be able to do what they need to do to learn outside. And a lot of times, there's other programs, other things that can actually happen so they don't have to be incarcerated. They're not there to be punished. They're there because of what happened. We're just following whatever the judge says, the judgment of conviction. There's only so much we can do about that.
And now I want to talk a little bit about the facility, Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center. Now, it's the sole female facility in the state. So what unique challenges do you face in addressing sort of the diverse needs of these justice-involved women?
It's very difficult because it's the only female facility for the entire state, meaning we have people that are from Reno. They come and they get sentenced, and then they end up going to Florence McClure in Las Vegas. Their family lives in Reno. So what happens with visiting? What happens with their children? What happens with family? It's very difficult for them to have that connection and keep that connection. So that's a big problem that I see. We have a minimum custody camp here, again, in Southern Nevada, same issue. Especially with women. You know, a lot of the women that are incarcerated left families out there in the community, and that's a big problem when you're far away and you cannot visit. It does not help you with your recovery, and it does not help you with your process. That's one of them, of course. Besides that, another challenge is that, again, because we have so many other offenders, and most of them are men, seems like throughout the years, everything goes to the men. Sometimes we feel like we're ignored. We're like, we're right here. We exist. We're not over here. And I've seen that over and over. You know, most of the policies, most of the changes, everything that happens is with men. And I've worked at both men and women's for many, many years. Half of my career has been in the male facility and the other half with women. And I do see a big difference. I do agree with what Dr. Salisbury said. Women don't really show a lot of violence, especially when they're incarcerated. They're different. We're different. Women are different. And I think that as time goes by, society has to recognize that you have to have gender-responsive programming. You have to be able to see the difference. Equality doesn't mean everything the same. Policies have to be the same. We are different, so we have to be specific when it comes to gender-specific programming.
Thank you. Vera, do you mind sharing your story with us?
Absolutely. First, thank you guys so much for coming out. This is such a huge honor for me to sit up here and share with you my story and how I got on this panel of amazing women after being incarcerated for attempted murder and arson back in the 90s in California. There was a time in which when I said that, I used to kind of go because I wanted to see people's faces drop. I wanted to be able to be there in that space when they look at me and they try to figure out, how could you have possibly gone to prison because you don't fit the bill, the stereotype, the stigma. You look a particular way, you carry yourself a particular way, and you don't look like everyone else. Because when we think about individuals that are incarcerated, we put them in this space in our mind. We put them in this space in our minds where they're dressed a certain way, they speak a certain way, they look a certain way, they have certain jobs. When in all actuality, I'm standing right next to you in the grocery store, I'm at Walmart, I'm at Target, I'm taking your tickets at the parking lot, or I'm working for you in the restaurant, and you never know exactly who I am. But because in your mind, you think that that person with the sign on the corner has been incarcerated, or the lady in front of the store with her baby and she needs change to get a motel room has been incarcerated, or you see someone pulled over by the police, immediately they've done something wrong. My story is this. I came from a long line of domestic violence. We internalize domestic violence or identify that as a husband or significant other in the home. Domestic violence starts early on. Mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, aunties, cousins, all of that. Mine started with my mother, who was a police officer. She beat me with her utility belt and handcuffed me when I was 9. She taught me how to deal with all of my emotional problems through violence. And so I was raised believing that if someone hurt me, I was to lash out. And I wasn't just to lash out, but I was to get the best of whomever had harmed me. Now, I couldn't do that to her. I was a child being raised. So as I became an adult, all of the things that I had internalized became huge inside of me. And I projected that upon everyone in the world that did anything that would come against me. However, I didn't really take any major steps until it came to protecting my children. And when someone interfered with my family is when I took all these additional steps and I went to protect my kids, and that is when I got this charge. Going to prison after graduating from high school with a 3.72 grade point average, yes. Walking the stage with a child at 5 months, I still wore a cap and gown. After taking college courses, being a letter-wearing volleyball player in high school, going on to college to take up accounting and law because I want to be a legal secretary for corporate, doing all of that. After doing all of that, I turned to drugs to turn the noise off in my head because I still didn't have a voice. I was raised in fear. And a lot of us don't understand. We think that it's respect that we're offering our children when in all actuality, it's fear. And so when I retaliated with all of this against the people who had harmed my family, taken something so dear away from me, I found myself in prison. And they gave me an assessment test. On that assessment test, I scored extremely high. They put me in the law library. When I went to the law library, I realized that a lot of the women that were venturing in there to fight their crimes, they had no clue what they were reading. So I wrote a novel or a manual on how to use the law library. The state of California took that manual and they published it. They left my name off of it. When I came home in 1997, I made a phone call because I needed to get my kids back. And I asked the lady about this 2-bedroom apartment. And she asked me point blank, have you ever been incarcerated? And I thought, did I get an accent? Like, do I no longer sound like the woman that worked in the front office at Magic Pan in San Francisco, where everyone that came in the office thought for sure that I was white and not African American as they spoke to me on the phone, but then they met me in person? So why would this lady ask this of me? But it didn't matter. She denied me for housing. And I thought, how am I going to get my kids back if I cannot even have a home? When I left prison, I had an entire packet of jobs. I went down those jobs, and not one of them said that they would hire someone that was fresh out of prison. That list exists to this very day. They send us home with it. You can find it online. That was in 1997. And still, to this day, women, people that are coming from incarceration cannot find housing if their felony is less than 7 years old. So from 1997 to 2024, the same issues exist. In 2013, I had this bright idea because my granddaughter was born, that no longer did I want to look the part of formerly incarcerated or justice involved. My granddaughter deserved better. So I started True Beginnings. I started it because some kids were behind my house selling drugs and my granddaughter couldn't play outside. And I said, well, I've been able to get a job, so why can't these kids get a job? So I wagered them, if I get you a job, will you leave from behind my house? And that was the beginning. One Sunday afternoon, this big, tall, 300-pound guy knocks on my door while we're eating dinner and watching football. Yes, football, I love it. He knocks on the door, and my husband at the time answers the door. And he's like, dude, like, what are you doing here, right? Because my husband's only like 5'11", and he's only like 200 pounds, and so there's this huge guy towering over him. And he says, I just need to speak to Mrs. Moore. I need to tell her what's going on. So I come to the door, and he says, I got the job, and they offered me a place to live. And he's bawling. Yeah. He's bawling. These tears are so heavy on his heart that I felt it. And when we closed the door, my ex-husband looked at me and he says, "You need to get an office." So I did. It's like, no more crying people at our door, okay? So I got an office. And in that office, I was partnered with a mental health facility. And they started giving me the opportunity to look at myself, because I never looked at myself. I was literally helping people find jobs and housing and reunite with their children, but I never looked at myself. Even after 5 resisting arrests that were deemed from me having PTSD from being beat up by my mother over all these years. Every time a police officer would pull me over for a traffic violation, I immediately fled. And the last time I went to jail, I sat in the booking area and the police officer walked by and he looks at me and he starts laughing and he looks at the booking officer and he says, "What did she break of yours?" Because I had broken windshields, side view mirrors, flashlights, all the things, fighting. I have been tased, pepper sprayed, choked, beat out, spanked, slapped, my hair pulled, and kicked in my ribs, trying to get away. I have sustained a lot of injuries over the years, and still my heart is there to assist individuals that are just like me, because what's happening in our community is that over 84% of the individuals, the women that find themselves incarcerated, they have sustained some sort of sexual, physical, mental, and emotional abuse. And that's why when we talk about violence, the violence is within us. I was just one of those individuals that projected it outward. Yeah. And so what I've decided to do with my violence, with all of the trauma that I've sustained, is to minimize trauma on other women, on other people within my community, by offering them the things that I believe are the solutions. A healthy network. You have to have people that are surrounding you that will offer you solace and safe spaces, that will give you sound advice and let you know that you are enough. I met Dr. Emily Salisbury back in 2017, 18, and she was doing this conference for reentry. And when she spoke on trauma, I just came to her with tears in my eyes and said, "How can I help?" And that is why I brought True Beginnings here, because nothing was being done for the women. Now, I was in Virginia, and I said that was enough, because I thought that they were behind the times. I left California for Virginia, and then I moved here to Las Vegas, trying to get back to California. And what I realized was that the problem is countrywide. And I had no clue. As I worked on myself and I've served women over the times, I had no clue. I thought someone had gotten it right, but we haven't. And so I'm here telling you this part of my story, saying, yes, I've undergone trauma. And yes, I reach out and I have housing for women that are formerly incarcerated. We even open a home for men that are formerly incarcerated, because we believe safe spaces is a public safety issue. And it starts at home. And we do shared housing because you have to build that network within and build trust. And you have to learn how to trust yourself. So we offer these promises that if we don't bring harm to ourselves, then we're not going to bring harm to the people that we live with. And we start there in that very small network, and then it branches out. We have trauma-informed coaches that will be able to provide services as well, because all of these things is what helped me. That's how I was able to get up on this stage. Someone assisted me, believed in me, and told me that I had the capacity to do something better. And so now I'm here.
If I may, yeah. So Vera, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's not always easy to share, but I know you're incredibly important to our community, and thank you for sharing it. Just to sort of piggyback on what you said too, like, I think, a lot of correctional professionals have the best interest, oftentimes, right, of the people and the clients that they're serving at heart, but in many ways, what we don't recognize is what Vera's talking about. Like, we can help women get a job, but is it a job that's going to take care of themselves and their kiddos? Do they have housing to come home to? Do they have an ability to actually heal the relationship with themselves? Because unhealthy intimate relationships, unhealthy parental relationships, relationships are a key factor and driver for how women end up in the system and oftentimes come back. But what's oftentimes the hardest thing for women to face, and it's true for men too, but it feels different for women than it does for men, is how do I go inward where the pain, shame, and guilt lives? Right? How I can help anybody else. Women are very willing to take care of everybody else, including you all in this room, right? But we have to take care of ourselves first before we can take care of anybody else. And that's really going to help sustain women's success upon release. Because if we don't talk about the stuff that's kind of going on the inside, to create a foundation from where people can, grow and grow roots inwardly, quite frankly, we aren't going to be as successful.
And to be honest, most females that are incarcerated have experienced some type of abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, and that people don't think about those things. So when that happens, if they don't address those issues, it's going to be harder for them to be able to re-enter society. So the trauma, it's a huge problem that we have. So we definitely need services that provide those type of services for trauma, for those type of people.
Absolutely. And on top of the healing process, we have to provide equity.
Yeah.
That means equitable resources within our communities. Because what we're doing is we're perpetuating this harm financially, emotionally, mentally. We may not be doing it sexually or physically anymore, but when we're perpetuating the violence by saying, okay, you can only make $10 an hour, but your rent is $1,000, and you make that in 3 weeks as opposed to making that in 1 week, there's a harm. There's a harm being done to the entire family, right? I believe, Gabriella, that the reason the numbers have gone down in the prisons for women is because women are taking the initiative to move out of state. They are taking their families and they're moving abroad. They are finding safer spaces, or they're huddled down and hiding in spaces right here within our community. And more people, because of the economy, are looking at being shared and living communally. So if you have the mom and the daughter and the sister and the baby all living in the same home, and then that takes away from the impoverished feeling, because now there's more people putting money into the pot, and now we can survive. And mom can go to 7-Eleven and get coffee, whereas she would have to beg before for the $1.29 to get the coffee.
Jody, how did Return Strong start?
So Return Strong is a little bit different. We are a grassroots activism organization, and we work predominantly really to elevate the voice of incarcerated people. When we started, my husband was born in prison in LA during the in the early 70s. Just to age us, we're half 100. But he was born addicted to crack and heroin, which was the drugs of choice of his mother during the beginning of mass incarceration before, and I won't go into all of that. If you're not aware, touch base with one of us. I'm sure we can connect you to some resources to learn about it. But the short story is that I had a loved one who was significantly impacted by mass incarceration. Even right now, there's no less than 6 men in his family that are incarcerated in the state of Nevada, and all of them done excessively long sentences due to enhancements, due to like a wide variety of things. Fast forward, actually, I grew up in upstate New York. Well, he was in LA living by himself in an apartment as an escapee from YA, selling drugs to survive because his parents were in prison. I was playing with dolls and running around barefoot in New York, upstate trees and all that stuff. In 2020, he came home in 2018. He went back to prison in 2019. completely like a normal experience that you see a lot. He got out here and I had a front row seat to the trauma that he had spent a lifetime in and out of prison as a child, as a 9-year-old, as a 13-year-old, as an 18-year-old, and then as an adult. And it doesn't judge who he is as a person. He's probably like way nicer than I am. No lie. But Rita knows him. He's super nice, right, Rita? But in 2019, when he went back, there were a few things that were happening, right? Early 2020, George Floyd was murdered. COVID had hit. And as a middle-aged, I hate saying that, but a middle-aged white woman, I was really struggling with what do you do? And I started to see things that I'm like, I couldn't unsee them. And anybody who knows me, I always say either do something or do nothing. And I had no idea what I was going to do, but I wasn't going to do nothing. And now it really started with a book club to talk to other prison families about, like, what is this experience in prison, and what are the, roots in Jim Crow and slavery and all the, about mass incarceration. And I had studied social movements in school and just was like, who knows, maybe we can start one. Like, maybe something can happen, right? If we throw a pebble in the water, there's going to be a ripple. We have no idea where it's going to take us. Right after we had that first book club meeting in August of 2020, less than 3 weeks later, NDOC, the old director, instituted a deduction on people's money that people had coming to prison. So if you were in prison and you owed restitution, there was a determination that was made that they were taking 80 to 100% of money. So if I put $100 on my husband's books, he was getting about $13 of that. COVID had hit, the stores inside of prisons were not able to keep things on the shelves. All the same things we were facing out here, they were facing similar things in there. And so we fought. It was like that deduction thing was our first fight. And Gabrielle probably remembers, we were pretty vocal. And we ended up winning statutory caps to that. I was not a political person. I had never written policy. I had never talked to a legislator. And we now have an organization of about 2,500 people in prison. We have unit organizers on most units. We have them in every facility. So Director Zarenda now will joke because he's like, how do you call me about something before I hear about it from a warden or from whoever? And it's really just, we have our finger on the pulse of what is going on in prisons. One of the ways that we do that is through a letter writing process. It started as a correspondence process, first with those deductions. We just said to the 15 of us that were at that first book club, we were like, have your husbands ask, who's impacted? And we started getting letters. Then we had to open a mailbox. Now we get, oh my goodness. We're probably getting about 700 letters a month across the state from people everywhere. We do a survey response method. We write to them, say, hey, what's going on with legislation that's been implemented? Is it working? Are they doing it correctly? And then we get feedback, and we take that feedback. I have regular meetings with Zarenda. We do a monthly director's letter, and we're able to provide oversight and accountability to the prisons in ways that nobody's really been able to do. And some days it works great, some days it works horribly, and I think, it is a necessity. Prisons need layers of oversight, and this is just one way that we've found to do it, is that letter process. Boy, I have one more thing, then I'll go back. Initially, everyone that was at that first book club and got involved with the deductions, and then a month later, 2 months later, the pandemic hit Warm Springs, and from overnight there were no reported cases to 400 reported cases. I think it was 413 if I remember correctly, and it was literally overnight. And we had been saying something doesn't make sense. These numbers don't make sense. There's no possible way this can be correct. And then everybody tested positive. But what happened over time, I would say that first year we were really specifically focused on men's prisons because we all had a son, a husband, a boyfriend, whoever was in prison, and our organization is still probably 99.999% women activists. We're moms and wives and girlfriends and aunties and grandmas, and we just won't sit and watch our loved ones be treated that way. But what happened is we started to make contact with some of the women. And I have frequently said, like, I felt very convicted as a woman leading an organization for prison reform, but we didn't have roots in the women's prison. We ended up being very intentional about reaching out. We now actually are in contact with a little over half of the women at Florence McClure have written to us at one point or another, and at Jean. And those letter processes, there were women that were on a wildfire team that ended up getting burned on a fire because of faulty equipment, and we were able to connect them to the ACLU. They wouldn't have had anywhere to go. They actually won that lawsuit, if you Google it. There's so many things that, like, just by reading their letters, you're able to. And I'm going to tag one thing onto what other people were saying. We primarily are prison oversight. Out of that, though, you can't stop doing the other work. So what are the work of things that happen before people go to prison, whether it's second look legislation and giving people second chances and opportunities and dealing with housing? One of the first letters that I got from women, a woman at Florence McClure, she told me her story. She wanted help getting on the pardons board. And in her letter, she told the story about, like, really how she ended up in prison. Anybody want to take a wild guess how old she says she was when her journey to prison started? 8. Very close. 6. She wrote to me and she was like, Jody, this is what I need you to understand, is that ultimately what she was convicted of was felony murder 1. She lured somebody to a hotel room for her pimp to rob them. Sorry, I get choked up every time I think about her. For her pimp to rob them. In the course of the robbery, he put something in their mouth and suffocated them, and the victim died. She's done 34 years in prison for that. What she did was lure him there. In Nevada, that's felony murder 1. You're equally, like, I don't know what the word is, culpable. Like, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm like, you're equally culpable. There are so many women, and what she wrote to me and said was, at a very young age, when she was molested, she was beaten by her family. Her babysitter's husband molested her. Her uncle molested her. And she said, I learned, by the time I was 6, I knew you didn't tell a man no. So when he told me, take them to the hotel room, I'm going to rob them, there was no question. I was going to do it because I was afraid. She has been in prison for 34 years, and she's not the only one. No. And so when Vera talks about, like, the violence that women have within, it's also a fear. And what I have found I talk to thousands of incarcerated people now and their families. But the trauma and the harm and the hurt just oozes out of these women. And so it is a different situation, and what we're doing is causing more harm. And when you look at those ripple effects, go both ways. They can be positive ripple effects for change, but when you look at families, it's like we get almost no families from Florence McClure that get involved and help with the work, but so many of them have children, and now their mothers are raising those kids. Those mothers are sometimes carrying the same harm that they had victims, and now we're generationally never rooting this in restorative justice and how we heal. And so, I don't know.
May I say something in regards to that? One of the things that I've seen throughout the years is a big difference in sentencing when it comes to men and women. The same incident, same exact thing a man does, they get a lot less time than the female. For some reason, the female always gets more time, and I've seen it working at both places. And I've even been seeing differences with the North side of Nevada versus the south. The northern, it's a little bit harsher. And their sentences, when I read them, like, this cannot be right. Why is this individual serving so much time while this other one serving a lot less, almost half the sentence for the same exact crime? And then I'm looking at the details, and it gets even worse because it's a huge difference for, it's just the gender has a lot to do with it.
I know, we're all like, I know, I gotta jump in.
I'll be short.
Okay.
So
We need Family Feud buttons right now.
so many women are doing somebody else's time. This is a pattern across the country, and in many ways, it's also policing interrogation practices. Women will not flip on their heterosexual partners, or the people, or their
Because
pimp,
of the fear.
or because of the fear, because of gender-based violence that's been happening to them since they were 6 years old or younger. And in many ways, this is a tactic that police officers and detectives will actually use in order to get more, like, it's a tactic that oftentimes is used, and then in also plea bargaining practices too. Like, lots of women doing somebody else's time.
So I'm going to flip this off of the women and flip it onto the system, because you brought up something very important, which is Jim Crow. Okay, so if we think about Jim Crow and the effects of it and what has happened where slavery is concerned and how it has progressed, and we think about that in conjunction to the war on crime, we think about how they decided with the 13th Amendment that we would abolish slavery, right? We're going to just get rid of slavery, unless, of course, you have committed a crime, then we would still get free labor. So now here the war on crime comes along, and they've already been putting people behind bars to get free labor. But now war on crime, because the industries are failing, and so now we need people to do free labor, more free labor. Things are changing. The industrial era has come to a close. Things are changing. We need free labor, so we imprison more people. And when we imprison more people, the most people that get caught up in that are people that are of color. Right? So the people that are of color get caught up in this because there's a war on drugs. And of course, black people and Hispanic people use drugs at a higher rate than anyone else. No, we are literally policing those areas more frequently. And so more black people get caught up in the system, more Hispanics get caught up in the system. And then that's not enough. Because if you know anything about slavery, we breed slaves. It is the identity of America. So what we do is we imprison the men, then we imprison the women, and we're breeding children to go to prison. And that's where we get the education to prison pipeline. And that is what's happening. So yes, of course, things are happening with women, yes, but the system is designed. It's designed that we put men in prison, then women in prison, and then we police children in impoverished areas so that then they will go to prison as well. And we keep this cycle going over and over and over again to keep our capitalist society running. And that's what's happening.
I might need your help.
Yes.
I might tag you in a second. So I think the thing, like, I frequently will say, you know, as a white person, because I have realized that there were things happening in this country that my experience, I was oblivious to. And so it literally is like, as your eyes are opened. So this system that Vera is talking about will continue to replicate itself if we are not vigilant in stopping it. So we sit here and we'll be like, well, what about slavery? Okay, well, slavery turned to Jim Crow, which turned to segregation and the civil rights movement. And we got there and thought everything was better, right? But it's replicating itself right now.
Absolutely.
It's replicating itself. We're taking people, putting people in prison, putting women in prison, and then saying, you know what? We're going to let you out on a diversion program, and we're going to put you on an ankle bracelet and let you live at home with your kids. But if you take your trash out, you're probably going to violate, your buzzer's going to go off, and you're going back to prison on a technicality. And you actually can extend the amount of time just by, like, not doing it. If we are not vigilant and watch what is happening, one system, just like Jim Crow became the new slavery, the same thing will happen now. And there are things happening now that will do that. We have to be very determined not to pay attention, or not to let that happen, not to not pay attention. I said that backwards.
No, to pay attention.
Yeah, to not be indifferent.
Yes.
And I think the other thing, I'll skip my next part. The other thing that I like just feel really like compelled to talk about is how we do the opposite. Like, how do we take this, how do we fight back against a system that is intended to do exactly what it's doing? This is not a surprise, right?
Yes.
Like, and so, and a lot of it comes on sentencing. How do we decarcerate? How do we, we right now are working with Mass Liberation Project and Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty on second look legislation.
Nice.
So people like Jennifer that I was talking about before can have her case reviewed by a DA. There are ways to lower the number of people in prison. And then ultimately, for myself, I'm sure for several other up here, is how do we become a country or a world that doesn't rely on prisons to deal with social problems?
Yep.
And so if you've ever heard prison abolition, a lot of people, their first knee-jerk reaction is like, oh my God, we can't close prisons and let all those bad people out. Prison abolition starts in community. It starts with doing what Vera is doing, watching out for people coming home, making sure they have what they need. And then those communities build a world that we don't need prisons, because it addresses harm before incarceration, where we then add more harm and trauma to it. My opinion, anyway.
No, absolutely good, Jody. You know what's super funny is that this is how brainwashed I am, because now I'm an abolitionist, right?
Yeah.
Being with Leslie Turner over at Mass Lib, I'm like, oh, they turned a page in my book, right? Because for a long time, I believed that I deserved to go to prison, and that prison has saved my life. I believe that wholeheartedly. So now, in some of the ways that we can change that, is what we were talking about, is ending indeterminate sentencing. Because what we're doing is we're taking the women and saying, okay, you get between 2 and 5 years for this crime. Between 2 and 5 years. Between 2 and 5 years. So if you look at the person next to you, if you're a couple, and you look at your husband or your wife, and you go, between 2 and 5 years, we're going to get a house. Then the woman is going to say, well, which is it? 2 or 5 years. And the guy is going to say, sounds good to me, because women are very logical and we're very strategic. And so if we say between 2 and 5 years, well, I need a plan. Because are we going to reach that by 3 years, 2 years, or is 5 years that point? When we say, get on your mark, get set, go, are we going to go on go, or are we going to go after the go? Women are very strategic. So when we do sentencing between 2 and 5 years, what women take into their mind is, my life is your life. I no longer have control. But if we give them a sentence, such as I had 4 years. By the grace of God, and I'm bringing him to the table, by the grace of God, I had not gotten a strike. So when the 3-strike law came out by Clinton and I was in California, I was not determined to do 85%. I only had to do half. So I knew that out of 4 years that I was sentenced to, I was going to do 2 years. What was that benefit on my family? They knew in 2 years they could look forward to 1, 2, and 3, right? I would come home, I would get my kids back, and my mother would no longer be the guardian of my children, and I would be moving forward. I knew what to plan for in 2 years as a woman. But when we do indeterminate sentencing, the grandmother who's taking care of the kids, or the aunt, or the dad, whoever's taking care of the children, because over 87% of the women that are incarcerated are mothers, right? That means the kids are in prison with them, emotionally and mentally. But the people on the outside can prepare. Okay, now, this is what we have. 2 years, I can do this. But when there's 2 to 5 years, everyone's up in arms. And we have seen since the pandemic, our entire economy here in Las Vegas change. It has flipped on its backside. And so guardians are becoming adoptive parents. Because how do we know between 2 and 5 years the social service industry isn't going to be like, okay, well, 2 to 5 years, because CPS says that after a certain amount of time, that guardian can take control of that child and adopt them. And now you've pit the grandmother or the auntie or the dad against the mother who just wants to come home and take care of her kids. Yeah. But she can't plan because the whole time that she's incarcerated, she's living for the system. She's like, what do you need me to do? I got to jump through this hoop, take parenting classes. I have to be still, be quiet, go to work, come back. And the whole time, and when I was in California in the prison system, the whole time the doctors are molesting and raping the women. The COs are molesting and raping and using their authority to overcome the women. The women are raping and molesting and beating up each other. It was hectic. And I still hear those stories to this day. And we don't want to say that that's what's happening every single day, but I do want to say this. The harm is more emotional and mental, and it really does start with the sentencing. When you don't provide anyone with hope, especially women, there is nothing to reach for. And so what do they come home to? Doing the same thing over and over again, scrambling. Through COVID, we opened April 1st. COVID shut the world down April 3rd. We opened on April? No, we opened March 1st and closed a month later. We had 4 women in the home and they were just like ready to go, but the world was shut down. And it was so difficult to explain to them that they had nothing to go do at that moment. Just be still. But because they were inside with nothing to do and all this energy just welling up inside of them, they couldn't plan. And then they had 30 days to get it all together, all of a sudden, because the Board of Prison Terms says, hey, you guys can go home now. I decided that you're free. They say, okay. Now they call their mom, oh, I'm coming home. And they call their kids, yes, baby, I'm coming home finally. And the kids are crying, and the mom's crying, and the husband's crying, and everyone's crying. And then when they get home, there's nothing for them to do. So now we don't even need COVID to be in place for that to happen. It's happening today. It's happening right now. I deal with women all the time that's facing that. So I think that one of the solutions is taking away indeterminate sentencing and doing a determinate sentencing, giving the women hope so that they know when they go to see the judge, they know this is how much time they're going to do. As long as they mind their P's and Q's, follow programming, then they come home with a plan in place.
And that would be for everyone, not just women, but women and men.
Yes, absolutely. I just said that women, because women are more strategic, more planners for the household. We govern our households, right? And this is when you're gonna go get groceries, when the kid gets changed, and when dinner gets made. We do that within prison, and we do that when we come home, right? Absolutely. The men go to work and they come home. And it's not bad or good, it is just the reality. And that is why gender responsive programming is so important, because if we offer things that women can understand and identify with, we can change the world. And if we give them hope, we can change our community, which will trickle out into the world.
And I think...
Thank you. So I want to make sure that we get through some of the other topics that we had. So
just going back really quick to what Jody said. Jody said that she thinks we shouldn't have prisons. In the opposite, I believe that we do need prisons. Part of the system, we need that. But not everybody has to be incarcerated. There's certain crimes that, unfortunately, people have to pay for whatever they did. So we do need prisons. We just don't need all the people that are currently incarcerated being incarcerated, because if we have alternate programs, alternate sentencing, it's going to be easier for them to get better, work on their issues, and stay out and take care of their families. But we all know that there are a lot of crimes that we cannot allow either, because we have to also think about the victims. We have a lot of victims in the community as well. So we have to see both sides of the house, but reducing the amount of individuals incarcerated is definitely one of the goals, and I think that would actually help society a lot better too. providing the services that obviously we need.
Absolutely. So do we incarcerate the person that has had a mental break because they sustained some sort of sexual, physical, or mental abuse? Or do we incarcerate the person that is literally a psychopath and we know that this is innate behavior and they will do it over and over again, where they belong in a mental institution and not a prison industry? Right? Because the prison industry is a capitalist society where what they are doing is putting people to work. A mental health facility is where people are getting services. So if we're going to incarcerate someone, who would those people be? Do you incarcerate the lady that stole a pack of diapers? Do you incarcerate the lady that stole the rack of clothes to sell to get a pack of diapers? Because it can go on and on and on and on. How do we as a society get to say who deserves this strictest punishment and who deserves services? And that is why Jody is saying we need to abolish incarceration, because we are a people, we are not without flaw, any one of us. Some of us have gone to prison and some of us haven't gone to prison yet.
That's right. Yep.
Thank you.
And some of us
And
will
so
have the
I wanna-
privilege to never go to
That's
prison.
right.
I want to get to Emily and kind of go off of what you all were saying about gender responsive policies.
Yeah.
So, Emily, could you kind of explain how do gender responsive policies differ from traditional approaches to correctional practices, and what are some of the benefits that they offer specifically for these women? Because I know you've done quite a bit of work in this realm.
Yeah, so I work a lot with executives and departments of corrections across the country. I have the privilege to be able to do that. Gender responsive strategies is really recognizing that gender and race matter. How we sort of have programming and services inside institutions and in the community corrections with probation and parole really need to look different for justice-involved women. So it's firstly a recognition that gender and race matter, and that the multiplicative identities, certainly in intersectionalities that we see across race and gender, absolutely matter. That women still make 80 cents for every dollar that a man makes, and when you disaggregate that by women of color, the numbers get even scarier. That in certain communities, women of color, of course, are disproportionately harmed in ways that are, higher levels of poverty and higher levels of victimization. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be celebrating Black Girl Magic or other things that are incredibly important in the gifts that women of color and girls of color bring to our society. It's a recognition that we have to increase women's socioeconomic status because, again, they're not just providing for themselves, but for their children as well. That it's services that are holistic, that we're not training or treating the mental health on a Tuesday in one program, and then the trauma over here on a Thursday in a different program, and then the substance use and addiction over here on another day. It has to all be holistic and addressed in what, again, we call gender responsive programming that recognizes that those whole intersecting needs are things that have to be addressed and oftentimes are affecting one another. It's also cooperation with community partners that understand what this means to be doing the work. It's having people with lived experience at the table, understanding that, again, right, like you've probably heard people say, people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. We have to have people with lived experience and impact at the table. So another part of these solutions are also, recognizing the incredible amount that the role that relationships plays with justice-involved women in a different kind of way. So women oftentimes have a need to connect with others. Our levels of self-esteem and self-efficacy is oftentimes wrapped up in the kinds and qualities of relationships that we have with other people. It doesn't mean that men don't value relationships. It just means that women see relationships in a very different kind of way.
Yes.
Women are motivated for behavior change because of the relationships that they have with their families, with their children. The motivators for change, for behavior change, look oftentimes a little bit different. And so pathways to the system oftentimes look different, as does pathways outside to keep women out of the system look different.
Thank you. Gabriella, you've obviously worked in the system for a long time, and I'm sure over the years you've seen a lot of changes that have happened. When it comes to reentry, can you describe some of the innovative or effective reentry programs that your department has implemented to support women transitioning out of incarceration?
Absolutely. Currently, our reentry department is providing services with vital records. In the past, we never really thought about that, and it was not part of our policies. A lot of individuals got released to the streets, and they didn't have a birth certificate. They didn't have a social security card. Therefore, they couldn't get a job, even if they wanted to, even if they had the assistance to actually do that, because they needed those documents like all of us do in order for us to get a job. So one of the things in the last decade that we ended up doing, we ended up implementing part of the reentry program, assistance getting those records, getting the birth certificates, getting the social security cards, trying to help them so they can go, as soon as they get out of prison, they can go and get their driver's license. We give them all that assistance. In addition to that, we have partnered with a lot of people out in the community, because as you guys know, we need help. We don't have the money in the budget to do a lot of the services that we would love to do inside of the correctional system. Therefore, community partners are huge. By having community partners and connecting with them, we're able to provide the transition, the smooth transition from prison to the streets. And that's very important, because that's going to be successful reentry. Therefore, by doing that, we initiate that beginning of change. Part of that reentry program, when they're still incarcerated, we have 2 programs that we make sure that they take before they're leaving to get them ready for the streets. We have a program called Commitment to Change, and that comes in 3 different parts: Commitment to Change 1, 2, and 3, and also MRT program. Usually we do that right before they're about to leave, because we don't want them to take those classes and then stay in the facility for another 2-3 years, and then they forget what they learned. We don't want that. We want to make sure that it helps them and they retain all the information that they learned, and then they can utilize that information when they leave. And then with that, together with the vital records assistance, to make sure they get that assistance, SSI, anything, any type of services, medical assistance, anything that they can get before they release. That way, once they're out in the community, it's easier for them to be able to be successful.
Thank you. And Emily, in response to that, what kind of recommendations do you have for Nevada in terms of improving its adoption and implementation of some of these evidence-based practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, coordinating with community partners is just crucial. As Gabriela mentioned, the Department of Corrections does not have any control over who gets sent to them. And that's the court system, that's policing, that comes before the correctional system. And so we have to be thinking about early intervention before people get incarcerated in our jails and prisons. I'll also say the jails, are a big piece to this too, because half of incarcerated women are in jails, not necessarily in prisons too. They don't control the budget, right? So I'm going to venture to guess that about between 2 and 5% of the DOC's budget goes towards treatment and rehabilitation. The rest of it is personnel, the rest of it is security features. So, if you and I want more treatment and rehabilitation going on inside our incarcerated institutions for our loved ones, then we have to show up at legislative sessions and make it happen. We have to ask for this. We have to have advocacy in grassroots organizations. We have to become involved. We have to dare to care about this population. From a sort of systems perspective, a lot of departments of corrections are starting to build in women's divisions. So as part of their central headquarters and their organizational structure, they have a position that is specific to the women's prison. Usually there's only one in most departments of corrections, like here, and although Jean, is also a facility. So that means that, that individual who's part of the women's division is in the meetings where policies and decisions are coming down from on high and filtering out through the organization, where they can say, well, what about the women's facility? What about the women? Because so many times decisions are made in a Department of Corrections headquarters, central office, not thinking about the 7% of the population that are sitting over here wondering, why did this policy apply to everybody else, but it doesn't really fit to our organization or to our prison in particular. It becomes just really important to think about, how do we give voice to those, not just the incarcerated women, but the staff who are working with them many of whom genuinely care about this population, but are oftentimes handcuffed by their organizational structure and policies.
And I think that is where the DEI comes in, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, but geared towards reentry so that the staff is literally taking that in mind to work with be gender responsive, trauma informed, and have holistic services provided within the system, right? It's also, as Emily said, it's really important to have the people from the DLC in these areas, like for legislation, but also work as a cell. So you have you from the DLC, you have grassroots individuals, you have UNLV, people that are in the educational system, people are in legislation, all sitting around culminating, and the Department of Corrections not be so closed-minded that think, oh, evidence-based, because it's evidence-based, this is the final thing, because things are always changing, always evolving. Women, men, children are always there's always different ways, and there's no cookie cutter way to help any one particular person. You can't put us all in a jar and say, okay, when I pull out this cookie, it's gonna have 3 M&Ms in it, and when I pull this cookie out, it's got 3 M&Ms, because it may only have 2. From all the women that are in here, if you've baked, you know every cookie's different, and that is how we are. So with us all putting things together and working as a cell and being open-minded, we would be able to create change as opposed to doing it through this evidence-based practice, which is usually geared towards more men than it is towards women.
Yeah, and I'll just say one last thing about that. Vera is absolutely right. Evidence-based practices become sort of this buzzword about what has oftentimes been developed for men and then applied to women. The programs that are gender responsive also have an evidence base behind them and that are gender responsive and trauma informed. And many of the things that we're learning in the academic space that I work in, things like working through trauma are really important also for the justice-involved men, right? We don't talk about trauma enough with that population, and we absolutely have to.
Thank you. Another topic that I want to get to is the legislative session. So during the 2023 legislative session, there were several bills that were related to the correctional system and prison reform that were passed here locally. And that was driven by advocacy of civil rights and prison advocacy groups. So among these measures, new laws have been enacted to limit solitary confinement, which we've talked about tonight, and to eliminate medical copays, which obviously represents a significant progress in the state. However, there are ongoing efforts to ensure the effective implementation of these laws. So Jody, I'm gonna come back to you. Could you provide a summary of the bills that your group advocated for during the legislative session?
Yes, I definitely can do that. I'm going to kind of group them rather than do them bill by bill, just because it'll be easier. So some of the things that we fought for, it was a historic session for prison reform and for change in prison, and I will say up front that a lot of that came from the ability to talk through and negotiate with Director Zarenda, who was the new prison director, brand new at that time. We were pretty new at this, it was only our second session. And a lot of the success we had was by really envisioning where we wanted to go and then having conversations to make sure that the governor didn't kill all of our bills.
Yep.
So with that being said, one of our primary things, and with the women, when we get letters from the women talking about solitary confinement or the BMU, the Behavior Modification Unit, how they're used, and I'm going to come back, is really that using prison as punishment instead of accountability. All right, you do not have to do both. You don't have to degrade and dehumanize people in order for them to take accountability for whatever happened that led them to prison, right? Those things don't have to coexist, and I think that's the problem, or a big part of it. We were able to win a restriction following the Mandela bills, so if you're familiar with Mandela or the United Nations work with Mandela bills, their recommendation is no more than 15 days in solitary confinement. So great, we won a 15-day restriction. Nobody anticipated that we were going to win that. This year, it was more, we were on a like 4-session, people considering like, well, maybe we'll get it done someday. And we were able to get it done. So what this bill did is define solitary confinement. I'm going to tell you up front, I think it's nonsense. It defined solitary confinement to anybody that is in, it doesn't necessarily mean they're by themselves, but who are separated from general population more than 22 hours a day. So if I am 5 minutes short of 22 hours a day, it's not considered solitary confinement. So there's a lot of work. It was a huge win, but there's a lot of work still to do. In addition, prisons in general, and in Nevada specifically also, call solitary confinement things besides solitary confinement. What we would call solitary, they don't. High-risk populations, lockdowns, COVID, shortage of staff. We just recently, there's people here that have loved ones at the same prison my husband's at. They just went through almost, I think, 6 or 7 weeks of a lockdown due to a riot that happened that was gang-affiliated or gang-related. That even though they came out once every 72 hours for 20 minutes to take a shower, make some food to last for the next 3 days, that still was not considered solitary confinement because they weren't separated due to a disciplinary issue. They were locked down due to a facility safety and security issue. So it doesn't count. So there's so much more work to do on solitary, but it was a baby step in the right direction. And at this point, NDOC is in full compliance with what the law was that was the way it was written. A lot more work to do. The other thing that we did work on was protecting visitation. So Nevada this year, people in prison in Nevada never had the right to be able to have a tablet or a phone or certain access to things. We're able to pass a bill that allows people to have tablets. They don't have them yet. But one of our fears, visitation is something that the Supreme Court has declared in numerous lawsuits that it is a privilege, not a right. And so, sorry, I'm not a lawyer, so if I say this wrong, bear with me. The way that it works for families is if the Supreme Court is saying that visitation is a privilege, the only way to override that is if your state creates laws to protect visitation. So with the ability to start implementing video visitation across the country, that results in no more contact visits. So what if your loved one is doing a life sentence? They're never coming out. They will never have human contact again. Not loving, caring human contact. If they're on death row, they'll never have it again. And our belief is that all people should have that access. Families are families no matter how you define them. Prison families are no different. And so we fought really hard to make sure that we protected in-person visitation, which we did. We won that. Sorry. Yeah. You're going to see me do silent cheers a lot because it was really a lot happened.
It's a big deal.
And so the way the bill reads is that upon implementation of any video visits, they can't take away our in-person visits. So that is a state law now. Previously, and this is very connected to some of the things that we've been talking around mass incarceration, the war on drugs, all of these things, is you see patterns, generational patterns of people who are in prison, usually black and brown people. And so in Nevada, we had a law that if you ever had a felony, you could not go to visitation and visit your loved one. As a result of that, we had mothers who in the 70s, 20 and 30 years ago, I think that might be longer than 30, but I'm bad at math. Don't anyone math check me. You can check me on the bills, but not on my math. But we had people who, they had a felony when they were teenagers, then they had their kids ended up getting a felony, usually almost predominantly black and brown families or poor people. And so we had mothers who were calling us, and they're like, I haven't seen my son in 15 years when he went to prison because I'm not allowed to go visit him. Or, God forbid, my son's in prison and I haven't heard from him and I am scared for his safety and I can't walk in and visit him. We had people who were literally getting people on the visiting list to go check on their kids because they were afraid that something had happened to them. And so our champion, Senator Harris, helped us figure out a way to do that. And so now, it doesn't matter if you had a felony, you have to be held to the same standard as every other person who applies for visitation. So there's some very small areas that you can't visit, but we have, I don't know about at the women's prison, but at the men's prisons, it went from like, people were visiting, now it's overflowing. Like you can't even barely squish in there because so many people now are able to visit with their family members where they had not for decades. Huge change. Another family-related bill is actually a pilot program at Florence McClure. This was a brilliant idea that came from one of our youth I forget what they're called, youth legislators. I'm not sure what their name is, but he's a kid in high school and he came up with this idea. He's not impacted. He doesn't have a family member in prison, but he was like, I just want us to do better by families. And so he was able to work with Senator Scheibel to put together a bill that started a pilot program so that the women at Florence McClure all get, it's one daily, right? They get one daily phone call to whoever they want for free. No, they're not charged for phone minutes. And we get letters every week from women at Florence McClure who are like, this has been life-changing. I can call my mom on Monday. I can call my kid that's in foster care on Tuesday. My kid that is with my brother on Wednesday. Wow. I can call every single day. So every week, I can talk to somebody in my family. I didn't have the money to do it before because they were raising my kids. They couldn't do it for me. And it's been a huge thing, and it's now being, like, we're trying to figure out how to expand it statewide. And I'm going to say one more.
Okay.
Only because it was what you guys were talking about earlier. So another bill that, well, I'm going to tell two more, but I'll tell them fast. One is a prison oversight bill that goes together that we were able to win a corrections ombudsman. So if you know what an ombudsman is, they provide like neutral oversight. It's not the perfect answer, but it is a layer of oversight that Nevada never had. We're in the process of it's been approved, it's been funded, and it should be getting approved at the Board of Prison Commissioners next week, or is it next week? The week after? And then we'll have a Nevada, well, the bid process will start for an ombudsman in Nevada. It takes a lot of red tape, shocking, right? The other thing is around sentencing. So Vera was talking about something like that, and I think if I was misinterpreting, let me know. In California, if you get sentenced in California, they had determinate sentencing. So if you went to prison, you knew on April 10th, whatever year, I'm getting out. As long as I follow the rules and I don't have any issues. That was not the case in Nevada. In Nevada, it was you were given all of your possible time you could earn up front, and then if anything went wrong, which during COVID, you could potentially lose 5 days a month. So during COVID, people in prison, their stay in prison was extending 5 days a month because they couldn't program, they couldn't get a job, they couldn't earn any credits. And so Return Strong made a lot of noise about that because we were all watching our loved ones' dates, like staying in prison longer and longer and longer for nothing that they could do anything about. And we got the attention. One of the things that we do well is we always say we're raising the silenced voices of the incarcerated, bringing attention. I don't always know how to fix it, but I'll be like, it's right there. If you're paying attention, you're going to learn about it. And that got the attention of the Sentencing Commission and several legislators. And last year we passed SB 413, which goes into effect in 2025, because there's a lot of work to do in advance of it. But after July 1st, 2025, people in prison in Nevada will first have a choice which works better for them, determinate sentencing if they've already been earning credits, or to go to stay with their current sentencing plan, and they get to choose whichever one works best for what their current sentence structure is. But after that date, we're determinate in Nevada, which was 50 years of political arguing about how things should be done, and we were able to get some sense of reason into it.
Thank you. Gabriella, could you comment on these policies and
Well, actually,
the effect that it
I
has?
want to talk about another policy that you should have talked about, Jody, which I think is huge for the
I
female
probably forgot.
offenders. It's for pregnant females and their babies.
Oh, that's yours, that's why. I wasn't supposed to talk about that one.
Then good. Leave it to me.
Right.
So now with this new AB 292, what's happening, we have to make sure that the female offender that just had a baby has some bonding time with the baby for at least 72 hours, which is huge. The only problem with that is that we did not have any money. We didn't get any staffing or any money. Therefore, the baby cannot come to the facility with the mom at this point because we don't have a place. We don't have the resources we need to be able to have them come into the facility and be able to have more bonding time with them. Right now, what we're doing in order to make sure that we're in alignment with the new bill, where we actually came up with an agreement with UMC, and they actually are allowing the female offender to stay with the baby for at least 72 hours. That way they have that baby connection, and that's huge, because as mothers, we all know those first moments when we first have those babies, they're extremely important. But again, a lot of the problems that we're facing on the other side is the fact that a lot of the times when we pass bills, those bills come with zero money, which means no money, we don't have no staff, we don't have resources. So it's very difficult for us to be able to implement them. That's why it takes a lot longer for us to be able to make sure that we get where we want to get. It's not that we don't want to do it, it's just that we don't have the resources and the money. The idea is great. The purpose is great. We are all for it. Trust me, especially me being a female myself, I'm all for that. That's a great idea. But if we're going to have babies in prison, we're going to need a doctor that takes care of those babies that specializes in babies, right? When a pediatric doctor, we're going to need nurses. We're going to have more people to be able to supervise. We may have to have a isolated place where they can be with the mothers and the kids, like a lot of other states. I know a lot of the other states actually have programs like that, and they're very successful. We just need a little bit more money and resources to be able to do it the way that we would love to be able to do it. For now, they are staying with the baby for 72 hours at UMC at least. Another thing that we're implementing, free feminine hygiene products. In the past, we did give them free pads, but now we're giving them whatever they choose to have. We have tampons and we have pads. That's a gender-specific issue that people don't think about. That's huge. People should be able to choose whatever they want.
However much they want to.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
Is it free, full access? They don't have to ask an officer?
Well,
Right.
the way we have it right now, because this is brand new, and
Yeah.
again, it didn't come with any money, so we didn't have the money to purchase extra.
Yeah.
The bill ended up being, I think, almost $20,000 just to get us through the next 7 months to buy the tampons, and we did not have it. We had to take it from some
Yeah.
other place to be able to purchase and be in compliance with the law. But right now, the way we have it set up, we actually give them a total of 40 tampons and 18 pads, and they can ask for as many as they need.
Okay. The next step is to
They
just
don't have to ask.
have access, right, and
That's
not
the
have to
thing.
ask an officer for it. But it's progress, Gabriella.
Progress, 'cause
It's
we need the money.
progress. Yeah.
We have to be able to control it somehow. If
Yeah.
not, we're not going to be able to
Yeah.
do that.
That's one of the things that is like really frustrating and challenging in Nevada is that we use incarceration as the main means of social control for what these problems are. But Nevada does not fully fund their prisons. So the state doesn't fund them. So let me try to, in education, right? We all, whether you have a child that goes to school or you don't, you're going to pay taxes, and the taxes are going to cover so that every child is educated. That's not the same with prison. Now, the initial reaction that I get from a lot of people is like, well, if they don't go to prison, then we shouldn't have to pay for, why should I have to pay for somebody because someone committed a crime? Because technically, prison is about public safety. And so if the prison is how they're ensuring that the public is safe, which I don't agree that that's the only way we can do it, but if that's where we're going, then why are prisons not fully funded? And what happens is that rollback happens on the incarcerated person and on their families. So for instance, one of the bills that did pass this year, as part of it was getting rid of co-pays, man-down fees, which would be like an urgent care or emergency room visit if something urgent happened. We got rid of the fees on both of those. They were the highest in the country. And we were the only state in the country that did not eliminate them during COVID. We continued to charge people $8 for those co-pays, which was a 350% for somebody on the street. What is like, I don't know how to explain it, like what your co-pay would be to go to the doctor based on a like on the streets kind of salary or income. That $8 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's like 350%, 352%, I believe is the actual number above for an incarcerated person's income. We were able to end markups. In Nevada, they still are marking up food vending machines. When I go to visit my husband at prison, it costs me $70 every day that we visit. So literally, I can't go visit him 2 or 3 days, even though he's available to have visits all weekend. I can't afford to do it because he doesn't eat while he's in the visiting room. I have to get food from the vending machine. So a $2 sandwich at the gas station, which is what's in the vending machine, is $6 to $7 in this vending machine. 66% of it goes back to NDOC, which is not their fault. I used to think it was, and I was very vocal about it. It's the fault of the state because the state has chosen not to fund that. So now, why did we pass a law that was for the benefit of women in prison to make sure that they are cared for correctly? They get feminine hygiene products, they get mammograms, pap smears, and newborn care. But we didn't fund that bill.
Didn't fund the staffing to get it done.
$350,000, I believe it was, $350-some thousand. Out of the whole state budget, we couldn't come up with $350,000 to take care of those things. It is a funding issue also, and it is the way the state has decided to do it. It doesn't work. It's not fair, and it's not fair to families. It's not fair to women. It's not fair to people who are trying to run programs. We tell them they have to do it, but we don't give them money, right? So anyway.
And that creates another problem
I'll get off my soapbox.
because now we have the staff that we have has to do 20 more things in addition to whatever they do already. They get burned out, they leave.
Yeah.
And then we have problems because now I can't run a unit without an officer, so now I have to mandate an officer to cover for that housing unit, and now I'm taking away from his life and his family because now I'm making him stay there even though he doesn't want to be there. And that creates more problems with our staffing. So it's just a ripple effect with everything that happens.
I want to be careful to say this, though. I don't think more money is the answer. I'm not, like, let me not sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm really not. Ultimately, like, looking at how and why we use prisons, what are our core values? And what are our values around reentry and how, like, every single one of these things has a core value that's rooted to, that it's connected to. And it's only by, like, stopping and really looking at those values that we start to make change. She's gonna kill me in a second, but I'm gonna say one more thing.
Well, okay, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time here. So I'm going to give all of you just a final thought. And Jody, so you can continue on your statement and your final thought. And then also maybe in that final thought, also mention some of the broader societal or policy reforms that you believe are necessary moving forward.
I'm going to try to be quick. I think I've said a lot of the things, like, I think we have to look at our core values, what is important to us, and then look out of the box of how do we reduce our reliance on prison, ultimately? How do we, so looking at second look legislation, so that if you spent a significant part of your sentence in prison, you can bring it for review. The laws have changed. The laws changed, and they say, oh, you know what, the crime that you committed, sorry, I keep pointing at you. You're in the hot seat. That the crime you committed, we sentenced you to life without parole. Well, now it is a 10 to 20, right? Why do you have to do life without parole? Because we gained some sense of perspective of what's right and wrong and change that sentence. So working on like, how do we decarcerate? How do we use prison less, right? Yes, ultimately my vision is to see a world without prison. Do I think that's gonna happen in my lifetime or my grandkids' lifetime? Probably not. I mean, I'd be happy if it is. The other thing that I wanna say is like, making sure that the changes that we're making are rooted in fact. So I'm going to give you one example that maybe nobody here has heard of on reentry. Have everybody heard of like ban the box on job applications, on housing applications? So we've been doing a lot of work with a national, like connected with somebody nationally with that. And what the Vera Institute, not this Vera, the other Vera Institute has found out is that it really increases discrimination against African American men, because when you check the box, if there's no box to check, then people are going to allow their own personal biases to rule instead of what that box was. So we're part, or about to be part, of a national pilot program that actually is instituting very low-cost health or crime and safety insurance for landlords and jobs. They did a pilot on it, and it was amazingly successful, because the reality is, even though we talk about recidivism all the time, what we don't talk about is hope and opportunity. So what if instead of like cornering people with no opportunity and making them second-class citizens when they come home, we actually give them opportunity to do better, and then guess what? Recidivism doesn't become a question anymore. When you can have health insurance, you can have a living wage, you can have those are the tough on crime things, right? Not lock you up and throw away the key. I'm done.
Emily, and we'll just go down the line.
Oh, I think, Jody talked about core values, and I think we, need to really think about, can we live in a world where everybody belongs and there is no such thing as othering? Is an ambitious goal, but something that I think we need to really focus on when we talk about justice-involved people, and that there are more than their crimes and they're more than the worst things that they've ever done, right? So starting with that and thinking about how the strategies, about how we start to mass decarcerate safely. I'm of the opinion that the staffing levels are never coming back to pre-COVID levels. The staffing levels in correctional facilities are at dire, desperate straits. Gabrielle has an incredibly difficult job as being, warden of that, associate warden, I'm sorry, I forget your title, but, in a position of executive leadership in the prison that she's in at Florence McClure. If the staffing levels also are not coming back, then that means we have to be investing in evidence-based and gender-responsive community correction strategies. And it also means earlier and earlier intervention. So understanding that substance use, our Office of Departments of Health and Human Services have to understand that the strategies that we have in place for treatment and rehabilitation for behavioral health also should be gender responsive in order to help people, and particularly women, not enter into the system, right? Those people who are at risk, particularly here in Las Vegas and the high rates of substance use and behavioral health issues that we have. And I think, I also just want to mention, we've been talking, of course, a lot about the criminal legal system tonight. It's important to remember that many people who are involved in the criminal legal system are also heavily involved in the civil legal system, family court, housing, right? Medical debt. I don't know of a research study yet that's actually looked at the overlapping civil and criminal justice, access to justice sort of issue. But I can venture to guess that there's likely so many people who are in the civil legal system who end up in the criminal legal system for lots of different reasons, where they're in literally lawyerless courts, where you don't get a public pretender or public defender, right?
Shame on you.
Sorry, I don't. Public defenders do a noble job and do the best that they can with the resources they're given, but yeah.
I'm different. I do not believe in legislation. I do not believe in the Department of Corrections. I believe in y'all. Each and every one of you guys out there in the audience, that's who I believe in. I would not have made it to where I am today if I didn't have a support network, meaning someone believed in me. Just someone. I was able to get a real estate license in 2001 because somebody believed in me. I was able to get a home because someone believed in me, and I got my kids back. Somebody believed in me. I have 4 children. They've all gone to college because someone believed in me. I started this organization because somebody believed in me. And it's ongoing because I have people out there that believe in me. And I have over 524 successful women that are living amazing lives right now because someone believed in them, including myself. So legislation, amazing, right? But then somebody's going to come right back behind it, just like with Roe versus Wade, and change all that. It's a moot point. It is, to me. It's about changing the mindset of the individuals that I work with and the individuals that I see every day, you guys. So if you think about things differently and become engaged in your community, if you feel like legislation is the way to go and that's what your strong suit is, go there. If you believe that something needs to change within the system, go there. If you want to become a volunteer within the prison to help these women find places to live or some place for them to nurture and become one with their babies before they come home, or, before they separate the mom from the baby, get into that. The change starts with every single one of you guys. I had absolutely nothing when I decided to give back. And it doesn't take a bunch. So I'm going to leave on this note. My organization is True Beginnings. We have a home called Divinity House. And what we realized that as the women came into our home, that they did not have a place to go away from there because they have been priced out of the housing market. We all know that wages have not changed since the 80s, even though we've had an increase in inflation, right?
Yeah.
More people are going to prison. Nobody's getting paid anymore. However, the house that I purchased back in 2001 for $192,000 is now $635,000. But the money that I was making then before I became a real estate agent, which was $15 an hour, still that particular job is paying $15.50 an hour. I could not even afford the house that I owned today if I was to purchase it. So, my organization is True Beginnings. I house the women at Divinity House. But when they get ready to leave, they need to be able to go into permanent housing. If you own property, investment property, if you are a landlord or what have you, give somebody an opportunity. An employer, give someone an opportunity. I'm running a campaign right now, $1,100 bills. What does that look like? Become a founder of a village, a housing campus that provides education and housing for the women that are coming home from incarceration so we can get them on the right feet so that when they come home, they can also raise their children and become productive citizens within the community right next door to you. And then you are participating within that program on that housing campus. And you have rights within your own community, so you're helping someone and providing an opportunity rather than taking it away. If you want to know more about all of that, I have flyers. And if you want to know more about me and how I got here, I brought 2 books to give away. But today, I stand on the premise that it is literally our responsibility, mine and yours, not just with the vote, but the things that we do every single day. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, thank you all for coming. Means a lot to us. I believe in change. I believe that anybody can change. But I also know that in order for individuals to change, we'll need to work together.
Yes.
I think we all have the same goal. We all want the same. We want more services. We want them to be able to have a successful reentry into our society. Like she said, we will have them be our next door neighbor. Their kids are going to go with our kids. So we have to be ready to do what we need to do to help each other to be able to get there. We can do it. We just have to do it together. And yes, we have to think about everything that comes along with it. We have amazing people that know a lot about, like you said, you're talking about individuals that are really good at something. Other individuals can work in something, but at the end of the day, working together is the only way we're going to be able to make any type of successes in anything that we want to deal with, especially in the correctional system. I've seen a change. I wish we were a little bit more advanced when it came to our criminal justice system here in the state of Nevada. We're getting there little by little. We will get there someday. That's my hope. I'm an optimist. I see it happening. I want to be part of it. I'm excited about it because I started 23 years ago. And trust me, I have seen everything that I've seen from that time till now.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So with that being said, thank you all for being here. Let's change together.
Thank you. And so lastly, just going off of what our panelists said, I truly want to thank all of you for being here tonight. This is by far our most rewarding program, and to see concerned and informed citizens here is very rewarding. So thank you all for being here, and another round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.